Hi, everybody. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Biodiversity Finance MOOC team to the second webinar. This course is offered by the United Nations Development Program, Biodiversity Finance Initiative, or BIOFIN, in partnership with the UNDP Global Program on Nature for Development, the NBSAP Forum, the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Financial support is provided by the governments of the European Union, Flanders, Norway, Germany and Switzerland, and the GEF. My name is Abby Trinidad, and I will be your facilitator for today. I am a senior technical advisor with BioFin, handling the following countries: the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, and Bhutan. And prior to BioFin, I was involved in the Coral Triangle Initiative doing knowledge management and sustainable finance. I have a degree in statistics and applied business economics, and I have written several peer-reviewed papers on resource valuation, economics, and policy in the coastal and marine sector. We are grateful for your participation in the second webinar titled Introduction to Biodiversity Finance and BioFin. I will provide a short introduction to this session to be followed by country experiences from Thailand and the Philippines. Let me now introduce our speakers for this session. From Thailand is Niran Niranut. Niran worked for the Federation of Thai Industries, where she created policy dialogues on free trade agreements through various economic forums. She joined the UNICEF Tsunami Recovery Program in the Maldives in the capacity of monitoring, reporting, and knowledge management. She served the UN FAO in the Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific by managing regional projects in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar on integrated cross-border value chain development and organic certification system. From the Philippines is Ms. Annabel Plantilla. She is the Philippines Project Manager for BioFin. Ms. Plantilla is a licensed environmental planner with a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of the Philippines and a bachelor's degree in environmental planning from Miriam College. Her professional career spans several government positions, stints with the private sector and academia, and a long affiliation with Haribon Foundation as a former Chief Operating Officer. Welcome, Annabel and Iran, and thank you for accepting this invitation. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Before we begin, I would like to share with you some rules and dynamics for our webinar sessions. First, microphones will be muted during the presentation to reduce interferences and facilitate communication. The session will last for 90 minutes. Presentations will be followed by the question and answer session at the end. If you think of a question while the presentation is in progress, please share it with us via the chat window on the right-hand side of the screen. We will read your question during the Q&A session after the presentations. During the Q&A session, you will have the option to categorize your contribution to the chat as a question or as a comment by clicking on the appropriate icon for each contribution. If you want to speak and the connection allows it, we will open your microphones during the Q&A session. To let us know that you'd like to speak, simply raise your hand by clicking the hand button in the lower right corner and selecting Raise Hand. The chat window will remain open throughout the webinar if you would like to interact with us or other participants in the session. The Click Meeting interface will, by default, be displayed in English, but it is possible to change the entire web page to your preferred language at the top of the screen. You can let us know if you agree or disagree with the information being presented, or if you need help by clicking the hand-shaped icon in the lower right corner during the whole session and changing your status. It is also possible to request that the speaker increase or decrease his or her speaking volume throughout the webinar. The session is being recorded and will be available on the Learning for Nature YouTube channel. All participants will receive an email when the recording is available. The presentation for today's webinar will be available in the course room on Learning for Nature under the Week 2 tab shortly after the session. Thank you for your attention. Let me now proceed with the introduction. During this presentation, I will briefly explain the main concepts of the BioFIN methodology and its basic steps. The details pertaining to the BioFIN methodology will be further explained during the next webinars in the coming weeks. The BioFIN methodology has evolved over time. The first group of countries used the 2014 BioFIN workbook, which introduced some major new concepts. The 2016 version was based on lessons learned from the first years, adding more specific steps. It also crystallized the concept of finance solutions and articulated better how the financing gap could be narrowed without solely focusing on revenue generation. In November of last year, the 2018 BioFIN workbook was launched, adding a new chapter on implementation of finance solutions and with an all-improved layout as well as further country examples. This is for now the final update as attention moves towards implementing individual finance solutions. This chart shows the sources of financing for biodiversity. While the data shown here reflects the situation in 2010, the general trend will be largely similar today, with the majority of funds in countries coming from public budget allocations. The importance of innovative mechanisms is growing, and a more complete assessment will likely indicate a much lower figure for the share of ODA, even though in individual countries, the share of ODA can be up to 50%. The BioFIN methodology starts with a baseline scenario in a country. Existing finance is not measured or known, and neither are financial needs. Once such baseline measurements are in place, the country has an idea of the resources needed and is ready to formulate a strategy to reduce them. The BioFIN activities are helping to reduce the finance gap to a level where biodiversity goals can be met. An important element of the BioFIN approach is a holistic view on finance that not only looks at resource mobilization, but looks at three other possible finance results: realigning existing finance, delivering on existing finance more effectively, and preventing future costs by acting now. The BioFIN methodology consists of three technical workbooks, which are the Policy and Institutional Review, the Biodiversity Expenditure Review, and the Financial Needs Assessment. Henceforth, I will refer to this as the PIR, the BER, and the FNA, respectively. The fourth element of the BioFIN methodology is the Biodiversity Finance Plan, and finally, the implementation of the plan. The PIR is effectively a systems analysis to better understand the complexity of drivers of biodiversity loss and their connection to finance flows. In the PIR, we review the drivers of biodiversity loss and examine whether some of the underlying causes can be traced to finance or economic policies. Is there not enough money for enforcement? Are penalties too low? Are subsidies contributing to continued dissipation of biodiversity? The PIR also includes an analysis of biodiversity policies, existing finance mechanisms, and sources of revenues associated with biodiversity. The PIR identifies the core and non-core biodiversity institutions and defines their mandates, which serve as basis for the next workbook, which is the Biodiversity Expenditure Review. In the BER, the BER provides an estimate on how much is spent on biodiversity. Of course, it is not as straightforward as it sounds because of the fact that biodiversity is rarely defined and/or there is no distinct budget line for biodiversity. Therefore, BioFIN has devised a system of attribution which defines whether an expenditure is biodiversity or non-biodiversity, and if it is it 100% or anywhere between 0 and 100%. The Finance Needs Assessment estimates how much is needed to fully implement the NBSAP or other national plans with relevant biodiversity components. Like the BER, the costing of the NBSAP is not straightforward because many of the NBSAPs lack quantifiable targets. The next slide shows how the PIR, BER, and FNA has directly resulted to policy enhancement, system or procedural enhancements, and immediate finance results. What follows are very broad description which will be taken up in greater detail during the relevant webinar on the 3 workbooks. First, let me point out what the PIR for Kazakhstan has resulted to. From 2015 to 2017, our BioFin team in Kazakhstan developed new regulations and actively participated in the improvement on current legislation on flora and fauna. And in the mid-2017, the president signed a law that defines forest ecosystem and voluntary payments for forest ecosystem services, paving the way for a PES or payments for ecosystem services. Furthermore, Kazakhstan has also developed biodiversity offsets, which is now enshrined in the PA law. The BER for Indonesia focused on budget tagging, and budget tagging has proven to be a very important component which is utilized by the Ministry of Finance for fiscal policy. Currently, the Ministry of Finance is looking at climate adaptation and climate mitigation, and in the next few months, biodiversity shall be next on the tagging platform of the Ministry of Finance. This is very important because biodiversity tagging will enable access to the green bond or sukuk, which is the Islamic bond, which was raised by Indonesia in 2018. So biodiversity projects can now access that green bond. For Guatemala, the results-based budgeting has resulted to increase in budgets in 5 municipalities. They have used results-based budgeting to link development goals with the budgets. And the observation is that for 2018, the budgets for 5 municipalities have increased by 53%. Lastly, the FNA for the Philippines had a very elaborate system of costing. The costing had used the budget codes of government. Furthermore, it used also unit costs for coastal rehabilitation, protection, and restoration based on information that was provided by a group of experts consisting of scientists, government, and civil society. Because of the very detailed costing program, when the opportunity arose that an investment program was being looked for, searched for by the government, the FNA that was conducted by the Philippines immediately was used for the development of a coastal and marine program, which costed about $11 million. So those are the immediate impacts of the work on the 3 workbooks. BioFin emphasizes various types of partnerships in country, major of which is the partnership between the Department of Environment and the Department of Finance. However, each country team is allowed to map out their own partnership strategy. And you will see here that usually the partners are the private sector, other national agencies, civil society, as well as academia. As we progress to phase 2, where we start implementing finance solutions, the partnership strategies also will evolve and change and will involve more participants in a more comprehensive and deeper manner. So that's the introduction to biodiversity finance. Now I would like to call on Niran to share her experience from Thailand.
Hello, my name is Niran. Sawadika from Thailand. Thank you so much for having Thailand introduce our journey, how we start the BIOFIN process and how we are now moving forward to the next phase. Let me start with the first slide. I think we all know that we're living in the digital age where our convenience, consumption have become a way of life, and our behavior feed into the cycle of waste. And this brings us to the place where the planet's population of 7 billion is now using up 1.5 times the resources that the Earth can replenish in a year. And these problems are increasingly complex and varied. Over the decade prior to the financial crisis in Thailand, our country had enjoyed spectacular economic growth. We enjoyed the double digits of the economic growth, the GDP. The inflation was very low and foreign direct investment bombarded into our country. And the sign of this economic prosperity can be seen from various shopping malls. You can see this when you come to Bangkok, and you can enjoy playing golf in many courses. And people do not really care about the problem of environment. They don't see the problem embedded in the urbanization. They don't see this because it was a time when the economic is so good. Many countries, including Thailand, pursue growth model based on the assumption that biodiversity can be sacrificed until a high level of economic growth is achieved. But until the worst flood hit Thailand in 2011, it's the real wake-up call for our country. It was when the time a natural disaster disrupts supply chain and wiping out all the profits from business sector. And people start to begin to think about how could the country balance the money-making opportunities of the modern economy with the conservation of natural resources. This is the real wake-up call for Thailand. And I was in Thailand at that time, and it's very difficult to live in the situation of flood. And we all, after that flood, I think we all aware that biodiversity, nature, environment is important to economies and our well-being. Thailand cannot and we must not stop at being proud and count on our good fortunes. We need to acknowledge what we have lost in order to generate those revenue and economic benefits. When you look at this position of Thailand as the world's third largest exporter of shrimp, we sacrifice our mangrove forests. Recently, our mangrove forests in Thailand are being cleared for tourist development, aquaculture, and salt farms. And more than 35% of the world's mangrove forests are already gone. However, the government of Thailand have taken notice of this alarming and this issue. The government sees sustainable development as a way to organize long-term national development agendas, and this is a way to address biodiversity loss, address environmental issues. What Thailand needs are sustainable solutions on multiple scales. We need better financing and more integrated resources management, and we should promote public participations at a community level to address the biodiversity loss together. From this slide, you will see that Thailand is very rich in terms of biodiversity, though we are very small. Around 8% of all species currently known in the world are found in our country. And we also have a diversity of animals ranging from the charismatic species such as elephants, dugongs, and tigers to the species that, though less known to us, nevertheless play functional roles in our ecosystem. It is no surprise that Thailand is one of the most visited countries in the world. And last year, we saw a record of 38.27 million tourists coming to our country. And we have to understand that even though tourists revenue can contribute around 20% to our GDP, but how we perform in terms of environmental performance, when you look at the ranking, we rank number 121 from the survey. When the BIOFIN come in, it was in year 2014, Thailand realized that this is the opportunity for our country to understand a new methodology on finance for biodiversity. Here I'm going to walk you through about the foundation of biodiversity finance and the basic principle and prerequisite for the process before the BIOFIN will be started. You have to keep in mind that you should bring the local context when you want to adopt the BIOFIN process. You have to create a sense of ownership, bring in a political climate that will be good for biodiversity management, and try to work things out with different partners. The first one is political will. It's important for us to get political legitimacy in order to implement the biodiversity finance project with the government. You must have their buy-in. Second, collaboration. You have to work with different agencies, ministries, sectors, organizations, from public to private. And you have to tell them exactly that what we are trying to achieve is the national target, the same goal, the SDG 14 and 15. The third one is the openness to the process. This is quite tricky for us, like for Thailand, when we're trying to get information about the budget. It's not easy from the very beginning when we try to get budget information from the Ministry of Finance, but after we explain the whole process, they with us and they want to provide budgetary analysis. The fourth one is the engagement with the agent of change. One thing that I like about the BIOFIN process is that they give you a very important tool that can help you to set up dialogue with powerful interest groups, and you can meet with future champion for your project through the communication strategies. The fifth one is the capacity. When I talk about capacity, it's not just the government, but it's about your own team. You have to find the right group of people to try to understand the step of BIOFIN, how to conduct the study, and how to start with the entry point. And the last one, you need to find the commitment that you will get the result and you want to make something happen in your country. And I think this is the good starting point for BIOFIN. Here is the process. During the BIOFIN process in phase 1, we start this in 2014. We have conducted detailed analysis on policy context. We look at main stakeholders, different institutions who works for biodiversity. And further, we complete our analysis on the public expenditure for biodiversity. With that findings, we continue the study on the financial needs assessment to understand how much money we need in order to complete the NBSAP and other long-term plan in Thailand. Without the BIOFIN methodology, I think Thailand will not be able to see the real finance gap, how to manage the biodiversity. BIOFIN process helps us to identify the right mix of finance solutions that are most effective in our country. Now, we believe that the conservation financing sometimes is not necessarily mean that we need extra resource or money to restore what is lost, but there is equal gain in investing to reduce any potential harm. Indeed, it may be less costly and more effective in conducting the latter. And Thailand is ready to move fast to pilot the finance solutions in order to achieve the national biodiversity target and the SDG. We are aiming to implement innovative financing scheme where we can find from the Biodiversity Finance catalog of BIOFIN. And I hope everyone can learn from the same concept in the BIOFIN catalog. In this slide, as I mentioned earlier about the prerequisite of the BIOFIN process in your country, I think political will, collaboration, and openness to the process are the key foundation for our BIOFIN process in Thailand. This slide shows you the list of key stakeholders who engage with BIOFIN in Thailand. The activity of our country started in 2014. We managed to get the host organization, that is the National Economic and Social Development Council, operating under the office of the Prime Minister of Thailand, co-managed this project with the other two organizations under the Ministry of National Resources and Environment and the Bureau of the Budget from the same Prime Minister office. And we managed to set up the steering committee, including different law agencies from Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, from Agriculture and Cooperative Ministry, from Science and Technology, from Public Health, Finance, and most importantly, we managed to get Royal Plant Genetic Conservation Project under the Princess of Thailand to be part of this steering committee. Yeah, and the exciting part of BIOFIN along this journey is that you can create dialogue between Minister of Finance and the Minister of Natural Resources. It's very exciting to get them talk to each other. Once you get your structure there, like I said, you need to find the entry points. In your country, you will look at different things. For us, we analyze the specific value of biodiversity and ecosystem to key economic sectors within our country. You can see here the market value of Thai medicine and herb is about $355 billion US dollar for medicine, 400 billion for spa, and it's a big amount of money that if you look at the economic sector and the value of biodiversity in your country. So we conclude that the entry point for Thailand to conduct the BIOFIN process, we want to focus on four main ecosystems. First one is coastal and marine. Second one is terrestrial. Third one is inland wetland. And the last one is urban biodiversity. This slide shows the key findings when Thailand undertake expenditure reviews, mostly on public finance. We collect public expenditure data from the Bureau of the Budget, and we define and develop expenditure data from the fiscal year starting from 2011 to 2015. And the results show that the main domestic sources of biodiversity funding in Thailand is from the government budget. And I think this is similar to other countries as well. And we found out also that the total expenditure of the key main agency accounted for around 80% of the overall budget on biodiversity comes from three main agencies: Department of National Parks, Wildlife and Plant Conservation, Royal Forest Department, and the Department of Marine and Coastal Resources. And we continue compare the expenditure with the overall public expenditure in Thailand and the GDP. In total, we can say that biodiversity expenditure for all agencies is estimated to be around 330 million, or 0.5% of the overall budget and 0.1% of the GDP. Once the BER expenditure review complete, Thailand carry out on a financial needs assessment in parallel with the study on the integrated policy and institutional review. In this phase, we look at the NBSAP, we look at the 20-year national strategy of Thailand, we look at the 12th National Economic and Social Development Plan, and we know that the current funding level in Thailand is insufficient. The national finance gap shows that we will need at least 942 million US dollar over the next 3 years in order to achieve the NBSAP. And this finding is very important for us to move forward to decide our finance plan. Before I jump to the last step of the BIOFIN process, allow me to share with you how we find the right opportunity to launch kind of like policy brief in Thailand. Why it is so important, from our experience and from the Biofin workgroup, we need to find the champion who can convey the key message to general public effectively. Our message is the key findings of the biofin process. So Thailand was able to organize the first ever biofin day, first in Thailand and first among the 30 biofin countries during that time. This is the event where our princess has attended. Her Royal Highness Princess Sirinthorn of Thailand sent a very strong message to everyone and even to other countries in biofin about our task, about the urgency that we have to complete. And her speech was considered as the policy brief for biofin Thailand in raising awareness on integrated finance solution on biodiversity management. Let me continue with this, that in order to make progress on policy advocacy, we think that we need to make the government understand our work, and this statement comes from the Minister of Natural Resources and Environment during the 14th COP of the Convention on Biodiversity in Egypt last year. The statement shows a commitment from the government that they will continue working with BioFin in the next phase. And the contribution of BioFin at the country level build platform for accountability in this partnership. And with this coordination framework, I think our country can bring together key decision makers to deliver reforms across public and private financing policy. This is the final slide for me. I want to show you that now Thailand is ready to implement the so-called Biodiversity Finance Plan. This plan is a living document. This plan is a commitment. This plan is the roadmap for Thailand and the government, private sector, civil society to work together to achieve the 20-year national strategy, to achieve the NBSAP, to achieve the National Economic and Social Development Plan. When we develop our BFP, we keep this in mind, the 4 finance result. Abby already mentioned about this, and we always keep this in mind, that we want to generate new revenue. We want to realize current expenditure. We want to avoid future expenditure, and we want to deliver finance resources more effective and efficiently. In this step, Thailand created a short list of potential finance solutions. We did our rapid screening process on its impact, and the validation process was conducted with various stakeholders in Thailand. From 50 finance solutions, we screened on biodiversity impact, livelihood of success, and finance results. And we came up with these 3 finance solutions that are already approved by the Global Biofin. We think what we are trying to do, it's part of one drop of the ocean, but we are trying to work hard with our strategic partners, try to implement this potential finance solution as our pilot. In our phase 2, Thailand look forward to working with an increasing number of partners. We look at ourselves as a startup because we are trying to launch something new, trying to do something that never happened in our country. And I hope today the Biofin Journey of Thailand can inspire you all to pursue new or existing finance solutions with positive impact to your countries. Thank you very much. Khop khun kha.
For that very interesting presentation, Iran. Now we move to the Philippines. May I now call on Annabelle to present the BioFin experience for the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Abby. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world. Let me share with you about the BioFin experience in the Philippines. In the Philippines, our implementing partner is the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, primarily because BioFin's concern is on resource mobilization for biodiversity conservation. We are based in the Biodiversity Management Bureau, or the BMB, which leads its implementation. Being based in the BMB facilitates implementation and ensures ownership, capacity building, knowledge management, and sustainability of initiatives. We completed Phase 1 last year, which covered the use of the Biofin methodology, or the conduct of the 3 assessments, and we are now in Phase 2, which involves implementation of finance solutions. In implementing the finance solutions, we are working with national government agencies and the local governments of the islands of Mindoro, Negros, and Cebu. The project objectives mentioned here cover Phase 1. Before I joined BioFin, I coordinated the updating process of our Philippine Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, or PBSAP, and this slide shows the composition of our National Steering Committee, or Project Board. After we completed our PBSAP, the board decided to retain the same composition for BioFin with some additional agencies. The agencies written in red have opted to leave the board but have committed to provide technical assistance as needed. On the other hand, those written in black were the new additions when BioFin commenced in 2014, with the Philippine Business for the Environment, the Forest Foundation Philippines, and the Foundation for the Philippine Environment joining the board last year. The board is co-chaired by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the Department of Finance, and the National Economic and Development Authority, and meets twice a year. This slide shows the reporting channels of BioFin to the project board, to the UNDP country office, and to the global team. The project team is very lean. In Phase 1, we were only 3 full-time staff with 4 consultants. And for Phase 2, we added 1 full-time staff and are looking at 7 to 8 consultants. We hold regular team meetings and participate in the quarterly regional Skype meetings organized by the global team. Being one of the pilot countries, we utilized the very first version of the BioFin workbook, which was developed in February 2014. The BioFin methodology involves the preparation of 3 assessments: the Policy and Institutional Review, the Public and Private Expenditure Review, and the Finance Needs Assessment. Based on the results of these assessments, we formulated our Biodiversity Finance Plan. The Policy and Institutional Review looks at policies that have both positive and adverse impacts on biodiversity, and in particular, on the financial provisions of these laws, such as taxes, incentives, fees, and penalties. We conducted an independent desk review of biodiversity-related laws in the Philippines. Since the workbook came with suggested workshop matrices, we filled them up first ourselves to determine repetitious questions and revised them accordingly. Workshop recommendations were incorporated into our PBSAP. It was very convenient that I also managed the PBSAP updating process. Thus, changes were easily integrated into the document. A supplemental report on resource mobilization opportunities from existing policies based on the independent desk review was also prepared. 2 of these resource mobilization opportunities are now included in our Biodiversity Finance Plan. We also found it important to compile existing studies on resource valuation to strengthen our business case for biodiversity investments. The next assessment that was done was a public and private expenditure review, which determined the baseline spending for biodiversity. The Philippine Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan identified almost 60 government agencies that will implement the various actions in the plan. Depending on the mandates of these government agencies, we subjected their 2008 to 2013 budgets to the various degrees of analysis as shown in the slide. Thus, agencies with environmental or biodiversity conservation and related mandates, like the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, were subjected to fine resolution analysis, while agencies that support the functions of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources were subjected either to coarse or medium resolution. We estimated local government expenditure based on data from a GIZ-funded project. However, due to time and budgetary constraints, we were not able to determine overall private sector contribution, although we did a sampling from 3 environmental NGOs and 1 private company. The public and private expenditure review provided excellent inputs to our biodiversity finance plan, as it identified government agencies and state universities and colleges that have convergence programs with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. These are opportunities for mainstreaming biodiversity into their programs. At the same time, it pointed out other programs of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources that can contribute to biodiversity conservation. To determine how much money is needed to implement the Philippine Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, we costed each of its 113 actions. We used the government accounting codes and standard unit costs so that it will also be easy for our partner government agencies to use this methodology. Again, before the final costs were computed, results were subjected to 3 levels of analysis and refinement as shown in the slide. This process further refined our PBSAP targets as the individual PBSAP actions were further vetted by experts. By subtracting the baseline expenditure for biodiversity from the total cost of the PBSAP, we were able to determine our financing gap, which is 19 billion a year. So our contribution to the methodology, to the evolution of the methodology, are the modifications were made in the workbook to streamline the process. And our process documentation and reports provided lessons to the BioFin Global methodology. Further, our insights on the methodology is that the iterative process of the methodology refined the Philippine Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. And likewise, the logic of the methodology facilitated the identification of appropriate finance solutions. I would also like to emphasize that we did a lot of pre-work in preparation for the workshops needed by the 3 assessments. And I think this actually refined the results of the BioFin methodology in the Philippines. So thank you very much. Maraming salamat po.
Much for that presentation. I would like to invite participants to share their questions, doubts, and comments, or raise their hand to participate in the Q&A session. Please use the chat window to share your questions, or raise your hand by clicking the hand button in the lower right corner if you'd like to speak to the presenter. We can open your microphone or read your question, depending on your preference. Okay, let's try to respond to one of the questions here in the chat box. How to rely on the policies if they are not legally binding and are established on a voluntary basis? What is needed for development of smart biodiversity policies to fit well for all environment sectors, like environmental, forestry, agriculture, and marine? May I invite Annabelle and Niran to share their thoughts on on this question. Miran, would you have something to share about this? I know that we're
Yeah.
working on a lot of policy initiatives in Thailand.
Yeah, I really like the way Vladimir put the word smart biodiversity policies. Yeah, how to make it look very smart. Yeah, from our experience, I think when we conduct the PIR, BR, and FNA, we realize that there are like top three main documents that we have to look into when we want to drive the plan towards the policy. Some policy may not be applicable in our study, but I want us to look into the NBSAP, the National Economic and Social Development Plan of your country, or even if you have any long-term strategy plan that you can look into it. And I think that kind of like guideline can help you to develop the policy, because this will fit well with all sectors: environment, forestry, agriculture, marine, or even mainstreaming organization like Ministry of Commerce and Industry. They will look into the same national policy, and I think this is one of the process that we are trying to rationalize when we conduct the study in Thailand.
Thank you very much for your responses, Annabelle and Niran. Maybe just to add a little bit more to the conversation, I think the NBSAP is actually a very potent, supposed a very potent policy if only it is formalized and institutionalized and accepted as a real policy. In many cases, the NBSAPs do not have the same status. And if you look at the content and the breadth of NBSAP, it actually includes all of these relevant sectors which Vladimir has pointed out. So it could be one of the lessons in terms of developing new NBSAPs, that it should really be recognized as a policy of government. Thank you. There. BioFin seems to be a process undertaken at the national level. Can this process work for particular regions within a country or even a transboundary level involving a number of countries? Oh, this is Fidele. Hello. So maybe I could try to respond first before I invite Annabelle and Niran. Certainly, when we started BioFin, it was situated at the national level, but now we see a lot of benefit applying the entire process at subnational level, which is being done in many countries when they start working, focusing on finance solutions at subnational levels. Inevitably, they would need to apply the entire BioFin process in order to develop finance solutions. As to transboundary level, I could not say for certain at this point, but who knows, maybe at some point we can develop some regional partnerships that would also look at possible finance solutions at the regional level. Annabelle, Niran, do you have some things to add? Or the other participants, you might want to also chime in, and if you have ideas about this question.
Abby?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to see this kind of regional perspective in this question, because you know what, when we look at the biodiversity finance in our own country, we sometimes we forget that we are we connect with our neighbors. Like for Thailand, we have ASEAN regional, community. We have a big countries working on the same thing, and sometimes we forget to look at other countries. But what BIOFIN is trying to help us is that we are adopting the same methodology and using our own context how to design our analysis. And this is a kind of like partnership that we're creating through the sustainability of financing through biodiversity management, because when we got the key finding, we share among the region. BIOFIN organized the regional workshop for Eurasia and the Pacific, and the information that we learned from other countries amaze me every time when I learn, oh, this is my neighbor, they're doing this and that. And this can help us to think about bilateral cooperation, trilateral, or even multilateral cooperation among the region. I think this is the way BIOFIN is moving forward to that direction.
Great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much, Niran.
Also like to share
Annabelle?
the experience. Yes, I would like to share our experience here in the Philippines. So we are one of the finance solutions that we are implementing is actually localizing the biofin methodology at the provincial level. We have been, as I've mentioned earlier, we are working with the local governments of the islands of Mindoro, Negros, and Cebu. They have localized our NBSAP, and we are continuing on with financing their local plans, and we are applying the biofin methodology at the local level. At the same time, we are also localizing the biofin methodology at the regional level of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. I think we are actually holding a workshop tomorrow with the local government units, and yesterday we just had a meeting with one of the DNR regional offices, and there was this aha moment. With them yesterday because they said that they actually are familiar with the procedure, but biofin adds the structure, and so I think the logic of the methodology allows the methodology to be very useful for at the regional level or at the provincial level. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution to the discussion. I hope Fidela is happy with our responses to his query. We have a question here from Leslie on Facebook. How does civil society participate? Does the general population know what is going on? Okay, let me call again my friends Annabelle and Iran to try to respond to this question.
I think for the context of Thailand, the civil society organizations are very, very strong, and they have their own voice and their say on the biodiversity management. And thanks to that strong position that they made in the society, it's not, it's not difficult for us to invite them to share the knowledge and experience and how they can be part of the analysis along the whole process, how they look at the policy of the government, how they look at who spend the money, where the money goes, and along the way they come to join us during the screening process when we select the finance solution. So this is how we engage with civil society in Thailand. And when you ask, does the general population know what is going on? I doubt that too when we did the BioFin for the first time, but when we organized the BioFin Day, we have 2,000 participants attending this event, and we did the survey and we asked them about the biodiversity and finance. It's quite surprising when they know something about biodiversity and they value this kind of conservation effort that we're trying to achieve. Yes, I think they know what's going on.
Thank you, Niran. Well, Leslie, of course, BioFin is using all available modalities like social media. We're going to mainstream media so that the message is known by the general population. But of course, biodiversity is a very interesting topic, but biodiversity finance would have its own audience, and probably the finance aspect would be a bit limited to those people who can make decisions on financing. I hope that answers your question. Okay, let's move on to the next one. When dealing with the government who is not prioritizing environment, biodiversity conservation, and doesn't release data or research on current state of affairs, could you recommend entry points to open up the discussion? This is a very tough question, but I think Niran in her presentation, she mentioned a few entry points. So Niran, Please, could you share some of your entry points for Thailand?
The entry points, we talk with the National Economic and Social Development Council of Thailand. We talk with Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment and different academia. From the very beginning, we thought we're going to conduct the analysis and focus on different economic sectors in Thailand. But after we realized that if we touch on this specific economy, it may not link to the biodiversity and ecosystem in a wider picture. So the entry point came up that why not we focus on ecosystem itself, and we dig deeper into the ecosystem, and then we will find more players in that entry point. And from there, we look at the different actors in that specific ecosystem. And one interesting finding that we found that the biggest budget for biodiversity related expenditure in Thailand was allocated to the Ministry of Defense. And once we know about this, yes, we have to go and talk to people who has no prioritization on environment, but how come their budget related to biodiversity? This is like an entry point. You did some analysis and you prove to them that, look, this is how the budget being spent, and you're part of the policy, part of this biodiversity financing, and that can be the entry point. You need to give them the evidence that they should be part of this BIOFIN process. Thank you, Abhi.
Thank you, Niran. Well, this question is really very difficult because we cannot apply the BioFIN methodology, obviously, if we do not have the data. And let me just share with you some of the experience we have in some BioFIN countries, where we have a very, very formidable group of a formidable BioFIN team consisting of very senior officials. Some of them are retired, some of them are in politics, but selection of people who can be very influential and who could provide these openings for us in the relevant ministries is one of the strategy that we have employed quite successfully. We have done this in many of the countries in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. So this was one of the strategies to be able to secure information. And of course, it's also assuring the provider of the information that it will be used for very noble means, which is the development of the finance plan as well as the accompanying technical workbooks. Thank you, Lynn. All right, here's a question from Carlos. Are there changes in other sectorial expenditures caused by the BioFIN process, like perverse agricultural incentives, for example? Okay, I don't know if Annabelle is on the call right now. I think she's here as a presenter. Annabelle and Iran, do you have some ideas about changes in sectoral expenditures? I think this is what we are referring to as realignment of budgets. Annabelle? Okay.
Maybe in the Philippines,
Okay.
maybe the example that I can give is not specifically on agriculture, but the Philippines has this national greening program. And in the last 5 years, when it was implemented, the trees that were planted were both indigenous and exotic. But right now, with the new administration, the mandate is that all trees that should be planted to restore forests should be native and or indigenous trees. So I think this is a very good example in terms of realigning expenditures towards biodiversity conservation.
Thank you for that example, Annabelle. Let me also share some of the initiatives being undertaken by India. So one of their finance solutions is mainstreaming, and mainstreaming means that they would influence the schemes of the Ministry of Agriculture so that it would be more aligned towards the national biodiversity strategy and action plan. So I think this is a very good example of how we see the NBSAP as encompassing not just the core biodiversity sector, but it can also be mainstreamed and encompass other national agencies also contributing to biodiversity. Your question, though, about dealing with perverse agricultural incentives is a very tough one. We have seen this being an issue in some BIOFIN countries. And in fact, in some countries, the amount of subsidies for agriculture is even higher than the total annual budget of the Ministry of Environment. However, it's not a very easy task to just say that you would remove perverse incentives. It's a very political issue. So I think these are some of the finance solutions that will really take a lot of time. But of course, it needs to start, and it needs to start soon so that we can see some changes occurring perhaps in the medium term. Thank you for that question, Carlos. Okay, what role can the tourism private sector play in advancing NBSAP goals in the communities in which they operate? I would like to ask Niran to respond to this question because there is one finance solution being considered in Thailand which really plays on this ecotourism. Niran, please go ahead.
Yeah, as I already shared with you that number of tourists come to Thailand, like increasing every year, and every year we are like the top 3 destination in the world. It's clearly, it's clear for private sector that they have to play the important part in advancing NBSA. They may not know that we are trying to achieve NBSA, but when you communicate with tourism or private sector, trying to convince them that what they are doing now is doing good for their community, and this will make a good impact to the national strategy, national biodiversity targets. And we're trying to help them to look at their operation if this is friendly to the biodiversity, and this is the role that tourism private sector can play in terms of like investing and doing no harm to their own environment. For example, we discussed with the party, the world diving company based in Koh Tao Island, where we want to pilot one of the finance solutions. They are aware of this and they want to be part of this sustainable development. And I think when they know that they can play a bigger role in conservation and they can help us to avoid future costs, I think tourism private sector will always say yes to our plan. That's something we can share with you in more detail in our finance solution. Thank you.
We have another example from Sri Lanka where the model is for the private sector to subscribe or comply with standards that have been set by the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority. So this is one of the finance solutions that has been developed in Sri Lanka. So it's really bringing into the fold small and medium scale tourism operators and having them subscribe to sustainability standards. Thank you for your question, Robert. Hi, Leslie. So Leslie asks, how does BioFin enable the CBD objectives, especially as it relates to endangered species? Nice question. Annabelle, would you like to go ahead?
In the Philippines, our NBSAP has 20 national targets, and the first target is actually on endangered species. An awareness raising activity for the tamaraw, which is only found in the Philippines. It's a water buffalo, and what we did was we brought social media influencers to the protected area to see for themselves the tamaraws in the wild. And what happened was they wrote about it in their social media. They generated interest we landed in the national newspaper front page, and one of the participants is actually now organizing very tours for small groups of people. Part of the proceeds actually go to the conservation of the tamaraw. We are also organizing several events with the private sector. If you're familiar with the coffee bean and tea leaf, as well as with Faber-Castell, we are raising money to refurbish cages of the Wildlife Rescue Center in one of the national parks in here in the Philippines. So I think the identification of appropriate finance solutions, particularly for species, has, this is part of BioFin, and it is enabling the CBD objectives, particularly for species conservation. This year, we are also looking at developing crowdfunding campaigns specifically for species. So I think BioFin has significantly will and is significantly increasing awareness on endangered species. And we are also mobilizing resources for endangered species here, at least in the Philippines. Thank you.
Well, just to point out that Thailand is working on conservation license plates. This is for the benefit of tigers for one particular sanctuary in Thailand. So your question about enabling CBD objectives, especially relating to endangered species, is very much alive in terms of identifying finance solutions. And as Annabelle pointed out, this is something that can really be marketed using crowdfunding campaigns because they're very they evoke a lot of interest, sympathy, and love. So this is why she pointed out that crowdfunding is one of our finance solutions for endangered species. Thank you, Leslie, for the question. Could the speakers update us on the development of the financial solutions that have been identified with BioFin? What works well and what doesn't, what works less? So this is from Julian. So let me invite Annabelle and Iran to share their thoughts about the development of finance solutions. But before that, let me just mention, Julian, that some of the BioFin countries have only started implementing finance solutions early this year. But as we progress towards the middle of this year, many of the countries will actually be starting their finance solutions. But both Niran and Annabelle are very well placed, and they, in terms of having knowledge of the full suite of finance solutions that their countries have. So let me invite Niran. Niran, I think you're ready now.
Yes, Abby, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, when we trying to develop the finance solution, don't forget that we have to do the screening process. And when we try to identify the one that works for our country, I think it's important that you discuss with different stakeholders and you look at the policy, you look at the plan of the country. And I think this is the simple process how you develop the finance solution. But when you do, after you have some concept idea about what you're trying to achieve, it's important for you to think further if this is a real business case. When I said it's a business case, I want you to realize that not only one finance solution can solve the problem. You need to find a good mix of solutions. It's different solution that BioFin can work in investment portfolio. I think this is like how you develop your own investment portfolio. It's like you need good for business investment as well, and that's something that you can keep that in mind. Thank you, Abby.
Julian, I invite you to to send a message to the platform, maybe care of Victoria, and maybe we can respond to your question, gleaning what Annabelle has mentioned in her in the preceding discussion. But thank you very much for your question. I think it's really the entire BioFin process that prepares you towards the development of finance solutions. So we really see this as a very logical approach. You knowing what the policy and institutional environment is, knowing what the finance gap is, all of this will help you determine what kind of finance issues you're trying to address. Is it really lack of resources? Is that the problem? Or is it more towards avoiding future expenditures or delivering better? So the whole process actually helps you to design good finance solutions. Thank you very much, Julianne, for your question. Maybe we have time for 2 more questions from Elena on Facebook. Thank you to everyone for very interesting presentations. Thank you, Elena. Are there any plans to increase the number of BioFin countries? How to motivate incorporation of BioFin tools in the countries which do not have country BioFin programs? Very interesting question. Of course, I could not say as to whether there is any plan to increase the number of BioFin countries, but this MOOC and the webinar is actually an opportunity to increase the virtual BioFin countries by your participation. So it's really nice that you're here with us in this MOOC and webinar, learning about the BioFin methodology. We will continue to engage and continue to converse even after this MOOC so that we can help you develop your own BioFin programs in your countries. Okay, this is from Mark on Facebook. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have a green fund generated by a fraction of corporate taxes. It now has a large sum, but has ironically reduced the funding of nature-based actions as corporate social responsibility for nature has disappeared. Companies are unwilling to give even more for nature beyond their considerable green tax. And with the fund being a state agency, which, like many government agencies in the developing world, is inefficient and poorly governed, so we now have more money, but fewer actions. Ideas on how to circumvent this? Can anybody help me to respond to Mark?
Maybe I am sure if it is an earmarked fund, there is a policy that that goes with it, and maybe a review of that policy can help direct money towards biodiversity conservation. If Trinidad and Tobago has a national biodiversity strategy and action plan, that can be a very good basis for looking and maybe proposing to amend the policy governing the green fund so that Trinidad and Tobago can say that it is going to achieve its contribution to the Aichi global targets by actually utilizing the green fund to implement its NBSAP. Thank you.
Interesting take on the utilization of this green fund. We see also many instances when it seems as if there's a lot of money but not a lot of takers. So actually development of projects and programs that are suitable to the funds that are available is one finance solution that we're also looking at, because it's very difficult to imagine that there will be a lack of actions that will require money. So I think it's really more just better management, better delivery of services, and maybe developing better partnership strategies. So thanks a lot, Mark, for that question. I think we've come to a point where we can now close this very interesting webinar. I want to thank Niran and Annabelle for their excellent presentations. And I want to thank all of you for the very wonderful discussions for tonight or this morning. To the participants of the session, you will be able to download today's presentation directly from the course room under the Week 2 tab. Please visit our website, learningfornature.org, to get the latest news regarding this webinar and the Biodiversity Finance MOOC. We invite you to share your thoughts regarding this webinar on the webinar page in the course room. We look forward to your feedback. Our facilitators will be very happy to answer any follow-up questions you may have. If you know anyone who would be interested in enrolling in the course and has not done so yet, we would like to remind you that registration is still open and it is still possible to join the BioFin MOOC community. We hope to see you for the third session in the Biodiversity Finance webinar series, which is the Policy and Institutional Review. For further information, please visit the Learning for Nature website or follow Learning for Nature on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you very much for joining the session today. Have a great day or evening, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.